In one kingdom, which on maps was marked by a modest blot of ink and the proud label "Everything is fine here," there lived a blue dragoness named NIvara. She was not merely blue, but blue in every possible shade, from deep sapphire along her back to a sky-bright shimmer at the tip of her tail. When she grew angry, her scales darkened to the color of a storm cloud. When she laughed, they brightened into something like a summer sky. And she laughed often, because the world around her behaved rather strangely and seemed to require commentary. NIvara dwelled in a tower that had once been designed as an impregnable fortress but had, by mistake, been built with a balcony for admiring sunsets, stained glass windows with flowers, and a staircase far too narrow for any respectable dragon. Therefore, NIvara ascended it only in theory. In practice, she preferred to live on the roof, letting her paws and tail dangle over the edge like a large, mildly sarcastic statue. Her main problem was that she did not meet expectations. People wanted 3 things from a dragon: that it steal princesses, burn villages, and roar dramatically. NIvara, however, kidnapped only cherry pies, set fire solely to picnic bonfires, and roared when she stepped on her own tail. One day, a knight approached her tower. He was clad head to toe in gleaming armor that reflected the sun so fiercely that NIvara had to squint. "I have come to defeat you, monster," he shouted. "Wonderful," NIvara replied without standing up. "Take a number. Ahead of you are 3 self-proclaimed heroes, 1 bard, and a courier from the tax office." The knight froze. "You don't look threatening." "That's because I'm not wearing my lava makeup today," NIvara said, lazily exhaling a small cloud of smoke shaped like a heart. The knight flushed but raised his sword all the same. "I am obliged to fight." "You are obliged to have lunch," the dragoness corrected him. "Judging by the way your armor is rattling, you're trembling. Either that's your knees, or you have a saucepan stuck in there." The knight looked down. His knees were, in fact, knocking slightly. NIvara sighed. She leapt down from the roof. The ground trembled gently, as though saying, "Very well." The dragoness landed before the knight and examined him carefully. "Name?" "Sir Aldrich the Unshakable." "Shakeable," NIvara amended, tapping his shoulder with a claw. "Listen, Aldrich. Today is a counting day. If you wish to fight, you'll need to book in advance. Time slots are limited. From 10 to 12 I read philosophical treatises. After lunch, fire gymnastics." "You read philosophy?" the knight asked, bewildered. "Of course. I'm trying to understand why people come to me with swords when they could come with a pie and a question." Aldrich considered this. His sword gradually lowered. "And if I bring a pie? Then we shall discuss the meaning of courage," said NIvara. "And possibly I will sign you a certificate of victory over a dragon. With a seal. I have a lovely one with golden sparks." 2 hours later they sat upon a rock. The knight ate pie while NIvara delicately pinched off pieces with her claw and reflected aloud on the nature of fear. It was her special talent. She could speak so beautifully and thoroughly that her listener felt as though he had just won a tournament of wisdom. Rumors of the peculiar dragoness spread quickly. Soon not only knights came to her, but peasants with questions, mags with doubts, and princesses who longed for adventure without abduction. One princess named Lila arrived carrying a sign that read, "Please kidnap me." Her court had grown unbearably dull. "Very well," said NIvara. "But without theatrics. I will not hide you in a dungeon. That's my library." In the end they staged a joint escape that resembled a picnic with mild scandal. The king arrived with an army, but upon seeing his daughter roasting marshmallows over dragonfire and laughing, he faltered. "She must be in danger," he cried. "She is in philosophical uncertainty," NIvara clarified. "It goes much deeper." The king, unprepared for depth, retreated. But one day a truly wicked sorcerer arrived in the kingdom. Tall, cloaked, with eyebrows like two ominous ravens. "I will seize these lands," he declared. "I will enslave the people. I will destroy the dragon." Hearing this, NIvara carefully closed her book. "At last, a professional," she murmured. The sorcerer rose into the air on a black vortex and hovered before her tower. "Dragoness! Fight me! Do you play chess?" NIvara asked. "What? Chess? Or riddles? Or structured debate?" The sorcerer blinked. "I am a dark mage." "Excellent. Then you appreciate complex strategies. Chess will do." And so began the strangest battle in the kingdom's history. Instead of fire and lightning there were queen moves, unexpected rook sacrifices, and philosophical counter-arguments. NIvara moved the pieces with surgical precision. The sorcerer began to sweat. "This is unfair," he exclaimed. "You're distracting me with commentary about the nature of power." "It's called context," the dragoness replied gently. An hour later, the sorcerer lost. I surrender," he whispered. "Splendid," said NIvara. "You will now teach magic to children. But without the gloomy eyebrows. They are alarming." For some reason, the sorcerer agreed. Thus NIvara became not the scourge of the kingdom, but its consultant on matters of meaning, humor, and responsible fire. Her tower transformed into a place people visited not out of fear, but curiosity. On the roof hung a sign. NIvara. Dragon. I burn illusions. I warm tea. In the evenings she sat atop the tower and watched the sunset. Her scales glowed with a soft azure light. Sometimes former Sir Aldrich joined her with fresh pies. Sometimes the princess brought news. Sometimes the sorcerer brought his students homework and complained about discipline. NIvara listened, laughed, and released neat rings of smoke into the sky. If anyone still asked whether she was dangerous, the townsfolk would reply, "Very. Especially if you arrive without a pie." And that was the pure truth. Several months passed. NIvara's tower officially received the status of International Center for Reasonable Fire and Moderate Heroism. The sign was carved from oak, gilded, and hung slightly crooked. NIvara refused to straighten it with magic. "A slight imperfection adds dramaturgy to life," she explained, watching the plaque sway almost imperceptibly in the wind. Life flowed on, cheerful and slightly chaotic. In the mornings, NIvara conducted the hour of rational roaring for teenagers who wanted to sound intimidating but resembled distressed kettles instead. In the afternoons, she advised merchants on pricing strategy, explaining that pumpkins could not be sold for the price of golden crowns merely because they had character. In the evenings, a small club gathered on the roof. Aldrich, no longer the unshakable but rather the moderately sensible, brought pies. Princess Lila kept notes for her future memoir titled "I Was Almost Kidnapped." The former dark sorcerer, now Magister Arcanum Valturus, attempted to teach pigeons teleportation. The pigeons resisted. Everything would have been perfect if, one day, an inspector had not arrived. He came in a carriage bearing the crest of the Ministry for the Regulation of Magical Creatures. From it stepped a dry, narrow man in a grey suit, with the expression of someone who had consumed nothing but lukewarm water his entire life. I am Inspector Brim, he announced. Complaints have been filed. By whom? NIvara inquired, dangling her head over the edge of the roof. Anonymous citizens. I adore anonymous citizens. They are so courageous. The inspector opened his folder. Complaint 1. The dragon is not fulfilling standard intimidation duties. I admit it, NIvara nodded. Last quarter I frightened only one tax collector. And that was accidental. Complaint 2. Fire is being used for domestic purposes without a license. It's for tea, Lila clarified. Tea requires Form 47B, Brim replied dryly. Complaint 3. You are issuing knights certificates of victory without actual combat. Aldrich coughed awkwardly. NIvara leapt down, landing softly before the inspector. She folded her wings neatly and inclined her head. Mr. Brim, she said gently, have you ever felt that the world is too vast for your tables? I like tables, the inspector replied. So do I. But not when they attempt to measure the height of the sky. The inspector did not flinch. You face a fine and possible revocation of your first category dragon status. Is there a second category? NIvara asked with interest. Decorative dragons. Without fire privileges. Silence settled over the roof. Valtor stopped teleporting a pigeon. Lila dropped her pen. Aldrich clutched a pie as if it were a shield. This is a misunderstanding, NIvara said calmly. I am fully functional. Would you like a demonstration? The inspector raised an eyebrow. Within regulatory limits. NIvara inhaled. From her mouth emerged a careful stream of blue flame. It did not scorch the grass but transformed into glowing letters that formed the words, meaning is not fear. The flame hovered gently in the air, like a thought one could almost touch. For the first time, the inspector blinked a fraction longer than usual. This is not provided for in the forms. Precisely, NIvara replied. She flicked her claw, and the flame turned into small fire cranes. They circled the inspector, not burning him, but warming him slightly. You look cold, the dragoness observed. Brim stood within the ring of fiery birds. His grey suit glowed faintly from within. For a moment, he looked less like a man from a folder and more like a boy who had once dreamed of becoming a hero. As a child, I dreamed of seeing a dragon, he said quietly. You are seeing one, NIvara answered softly. And it does not destroy villages. It destroys boredom. Someone on the roof applauded quietly. It might have been one of the pigeons. The inspector closed his folder. Formally, he said, you are in violation of several articles. Undoubtedly. But your actions contribute to public stability. And good spirits, Aldrich added. And education, Valtor inserted. And literature, Lila declared proudly. The inspector took a deep breath. I will reclassify your status. From now on, you are a dragon of non-standard designation. That sounds like a compliment, NIvara smiled. You are hereby permitted to use fire for cultural and philosophical purposes. I have always maintained that philosophy requires warmth, the dragoness remarked. As the inspector departed, the fire cranes escorted his carriage to the horizon. That evening, NIvara once again sat upon the roof. The sunset shimmered across her scales as though someone had carefully painted the sky in her shades. You could have simply burned his folder, Aldrich noted. And deprive myself of the pleasure of dialogue. NIvara shook her head. No. Fire is useful when it illuminates. Lila looked up from her notes. You know, if one day a real enemy appears, Someone who refuses to play chess or listen to lectures. NIvara smiled, and her eyes flared a touch brighter. Then I shall be a first-category dragon. But as long as the world is willing to converse, I prefer to be its blue paws. She released a large glowing ring of smoke into the sky. For a moment, words appeared within it. Not every flame burns. Some simply warm. The kingdom's inhabitants had long grown accustomed to their peculiar dragoness. They knew that if you came to her with a sword, she would offer tea. If you came with fear, she would offer a thought. And if you came without a pie, well. Even the most non-standard dragon has principles. One morning, NIvara awoke to a sound that, in her internal classification system, was labeled collective panic in F-sharp. The sound was getting closer. On the hill before the tower, the villagers had already gathered. Bakers, blacksmiths, 3 uncertain knights, 1 shepherd, and Inspector Brim, who, judging by his expression, had woken up in violation of proper procedure. What happened? NIvara asked, leaning her head out the window. He's arrived, someone shouted. Who exactly? Please specify. We value diversity here, you know. A dot appeared on the horizon. The dot grew. The dot turned out to be green. Seconds later, a massive emerald dragon hovered in the sky. His scales gleamed like a freshly polished throne, his eyes flashing with ancient superiority. He landed in such a way that the grass reconsidered the meaning of life. I am Graaltor, flame of the doomsday wind, he thundered. Which one of you calls herself a dragon? NIvara descended carefully. I do. NIvara. Flame of tea and reasonable decisions. Graaltor narrowed his eyes. You're blue. Yes. It's not a disease. You haven't destroyed a single castle. Castles are poorly designed to begin with. The green dragon spread his wings. Dragons must inspire terror. We are an ancient force. We are the embodiment of chaos. NIvara glanced at the villagers, who huddled together but did not run. You see, she said calmly, I inspire terror exclusively in unreasonable ideas. Graaltor snorted, releasing a jet of flame that incinerated the old sign reading International Center. Aldrich gasped. Lila dropped her new inkwell. Brim pulled out his notebook. Destruction of signage, he noted dryly. Unauthorized use of fire without philosophical accompaniment. Graaltor turned to him. Who is this small human? A regulator, NIvara replied. They appear when the universe becomes too loud. I challenge you to a dragon's duel. Graaltor roared. The villagers went pale. Even Valtor stopped teaching pigeons levitation. NIvara considered this. The format, she asked. A battle until superiority is acknowledged. Boring. Then what do you propose? NIvara raised a claw. 3 trials. Strength, wisdom, and influence. Graaltor smirked. I agree. I will crush you in all 3. Trial 1. Strength. They walked to a massive rock behind the tower. Graaltor soared into the air and unleashed a torrent of green flame upon it. The stone cracked, split, and collapsed into ash. The crowd gasped. NIvara approached another rock. She inhaled. Her blue flame touched the stone gently, like a thought. The rock did not crumble. It began to glow. Patterns emerged, and then an entire scene, a dragon holding a small house in its claws without dropping it. You did not destroy it, Graaltor observed. I changed its form, NIvara replied. The villagers exchanged glances. A few began to applaud. Trial 2. Wisdom. Graaltor climbed onto a rock. What is a dragon's purpose? He asked thunderously. To rule through fear, he answered himself. To be the pinnacle. NIvara looked at the children peeking from behind their mother's skirts. A dragon's purpose, she said calmly, is to be strong enough to choose when not to use strength. Silence settled like a soft cloak. Inspector Brim nodded almost imperceptibly. Graaltor frowned. Words. They are only words. Exactly, NIvara replied. Words can weigh more than stone. Trial 3. Influence. If you are so beloved, the green dragon growled, let the people choose. Which of us is their dragon? He spread his wings, fearsome and magnificent. NIvara did nothing. She simply sat on the ground, curling her tail into a neat spiral. I do not demand a choice, she said quietly. I offer presence. A pause hung in the air. The shepherd stepped forward. She helped me not sell my sheep for nothing. The baker raised his hand. She taught me not to fear experimenting with cinnamon. Aldrich straightened. She allowed me to be brave without being foolish. Lila smiled. She kidnapped me in a way that made me want to return. Even Valtorus cleared his throat. She taught me to teach without darkness. Graaltor slowly folded his wings. He looked at the people as if seeing them for the first time, not as background figures in a legend, but as beings with their own stories. I have wandered for centuries, he said quietly. Wherever I appeared, I was feared. And you were alone, NIvara said gently. The green dragon did not answer. The wind moved across the hill. The grass rustled like turning pages. And if, Graaltor began, if I do not wish to be only terror. NIvara smiled. Then stay. We have an opening for a second dragon of unconventional designation. Inspector Brim closed his notebook. I will prepare an additional form. A week later, a second rock appeared beside the tower. Upon it sat Graaltor, awkwardly holding a cup of tea in both claws. It's too hot, he muttered. That's because you are used to flame, NIvara said. Try getting used to warmth. In the evenings now, two fiery patterns appeared in the sky. Blue and green. They intertwined, not fighting, but drawing stories. The villagers no longer whispered about monsters. They spoke of dragons as neighbors with an impressive wingspan. Sometimes someone would still ask. What if a third appears? Red. Black. NIvara would gaze at the horizon, squinting thoughtfully. The more colors, the more interesting the palette. And then she would release a neat blue ring of smoke into the sky, inside which words would flare. Power without choice is just noise. And somewhere deep in his chest, even the ancient green dragon felt how that noise was slowly turning into music. One early morning, when the fog was lazily rehearsing the role of mystery, NIvara awoke to a sound that in her internal catalogue was labeled the fateful awkward cough of the universe. The sound was coming from below. She leaned out of the tower window and saw a peculiar procession. A cart rolled up the road toward the hill, drawn by a donkey wearing the expression of a seasoned philosopher. Behind the cart walked figures in grey robes. At the front strode a tall man with a crimson seal on his chest. Inspector Brim was already standing at the foot of the tower and looked as though he had been awakened before the proper clause. Report, NIvara said calmly. A delegation, Brim replied dryly. From the Central Council for the Oversight of Unpredictable Beings. Graaltor, seated on the neighboring rock and carefully cooling his tea with measured breaths, joked. Is that about us? he asked. We are quite predictable, NIvara observed. I brew tea at 8. You complain at 8:15. The procession stopped. The tall man raised his head. I am Magister Corvinus of the Council, he proclaimed in a voice accustomed to echoing halls. We have received reports of 2 dragons failing to fulfill their standard duties. Graaltor narrowed his eyes. What duties? Corvinus unfurled a scroll. It was so long that the donkey sighed softly. Section 1, to inspire fear. Section 2, to periodically destroy architectural objects in order to maintain mythological balance. Section 3, to kidnap at least 1 hero per quarter. Lila, standing in the crowd, raised her hand. I've already been kidnapped. It was pleasant. Corvinus faltered. That is not in proper form. NIvara descended, her scales gently reflecting the morning light. Welcome, Magister. Tea. I am not here for tea, he protested. I am here for inspection. Graaltor spread his wings, though without the former theatrical thunder. And what happens if we do not comply? Corvinus smiled a thin smile. Then the council will assign you a corrective curse. Light. Temporary. With mandatory fire reporting. Inspector Brim instantly opened his notebook. A curse requires registration in triplicate, he noted. And philosophical accompaniment. I represent the philosophy of the council, the Magister snapped. NIvara inclined her head. And what is the purpose of this inspection? To determine whether you fulfill the function of dragons. Graaltor snorted. And if we fulfill the function, better. The crowd began to murmur. Corvinus raised a hand. A dragon is chaos. It is fear. It is a trial for heroes. We have heroes, NIvara said calmly. They are simply no longer required to die for self-esteem. Aldrich straightened proudly. He wore a new cloak, free of tragic destiny. I became a hero without dying, he declared. It saves time. Corvinus rubbed the bridge of his nose. The council demands a demonstration of traditional behavior. Immediately. Graaltor looked at NIvara. Do we need to destroy something? We've run out of old signs, she replied thoughtfully. Valtorus cautiously raised a finger. I have an old cauldron I meant to replace anyway. NIvara nodded. That will do. The cauldron was carried to the center of the field. Corvinus crossed his arms. Proceed. Flame. Roar. Terror. Graaltor inhaled and released an impressive stream of green fire. The cauldron glowed white hot. NIvara added a thin thread of blue flame. Within moments the metal changed. It stretched, curved, and transformed into an elegant fountain. Warm water scented with mint began to flow from it. The crowd gasped. That is not destruction, Corvinus said coldly. It is redistribution, NIvara replied gently. You are obliged to inspire fear. Graaltor considered this. Then he leaned down toward the Magister so closely that the shadow of his wings enveloped him entirely. Boo, he said quietly. Corvinus went pale. There, he exclaimed, regaining himself. Exactly like that. But we do not wish him to live in that state permanently, NIvara added. She released a careful blue ring of smoke into the air. Inside it, words flared. Fear is useful like salt. Not as the main course. The villagers applauded. Corvinus looked at them, and something flickered across his face. If dragons cease to be frightening, he began slowly, people will stop striving for feats. Or they will begin striving for wisdom, NIvara said softly. Silence settled. The donkey snorted, as if summarizing. Inspector Brim closed his notebook. I find no violations, he announced. Curse denied on the grounds of constructive fire application. Corvinus looked around. The people stood beside the two dragons not by coercion, but by choice. The council will not understand, he whispered. Then explain it to them, NIvara said. Or bring them here. There is enough tea. Graaltor carefully placed a cup before the magister. Hold it with both hands, he advised. Otherwise it spills. The magister hesitated, then took the cup. He sipped. And suddenly he laughed. Awkwardly. Sincerely. Like someone who had not allowed himself to be anything but stern for a very long time. Perhaps, he said, functions can evolve. Term approved, Brim nodded. When the delegation departed, leaving behind only neat tracks and a slightly enlightened donkey, Graaltor gazed at the horizon. Do you think they will return? Of course, NIvara replied. The world likes to test those who change the rules. That evening, two fiery patterns rose again into the sky. Blue and green. This time a thin crimson spark joined them. It was Corvinus, beyond the hill, awkwardly attempting to exhale a tiny spell flame and accidentally drawing a heart. NIvara watched and spoke quietly. You see. Even control can learn creativity. Graaltor nodded thoughtfully. And somewhere deep within the ancient green dragon a new sensation was born. Not noise. Not chaos. Responsibility that does not press down, but holds steady. And the tower stood upon the hill like a lighthouse that shines not because it fears the dark, but because it knows that shining is also a choice.